As night falls and the world grows quiet, let your thoughts drift away from the concerns of today. There is a place waiting for you, neither here nor there, neither now nor then, but somewhere in the mists of time where stories were born. Ancient Greece, a land of olive groves and marble temples, where mountains reach toward a sky that once held gods. Tonight, we journey to this realm of myth, where the immortals walked among mortals and heroes challenged the boundaries of human possibility. The stories of Greek mythology have endured for thousands of years, outlasting empires and civilizations. They speak to something timeless within us, something that recognizes in these tales our own deepest fears and highest aspirations. As you settle into comfort, allow yourself to be carried to a world where the line between reality and imagination blurs, where gods and monsters reveal truths about our own nature. These myths were not merely entertainment, but a way of understanding the world, of making sense of natural phenomena, human behavior, and the great mysteries of existence. Before there were gods, before there were humans, before there was even earth or sky, there was chaos. Not chaos as we think of it today, not disorder and confusion, but chaos as an infinite void, a yawning emptiness containing all possibility. From this formless beginning emerged the first divine beings. Gaia, the earth, rose from chaos, bringing form and substance to the void. She was the first mother, the foundation of all that would come after. With her came Tartarus, the underworld depths, and Eros, the force of attraction that would allow creation to continue. Gaia gave birth to Uranus, the starry sky, who became her husband and equal, covering her completely. Their embrace created the boundaries of the early world, the meeting of earth and sky that we still witness at the horizon. From their union came the Titans, 12 powerful deities who would rule the cosmos before the gods of Olympus. Among these Titans were Oceanus, who encircled the world as the great river, and Rhea and Cronus, whose children would overthrow them just as they had overthrown their parents. The cycle of generational conflict began with Uranus, who feared his children's power. He forced the Titans back into Gaia's womb, causing her great pain. But the youngest Titan, Cronus, armed with a sickle crafted by his mother, rose against his father. He ambushed Uranus and castrated him, throwing his severed genitals into the sea. From the blood that fell upon Gaia came the Erinyes, the Furies who punished oath-breakers, and from the sea foam around the discarded flesh rose Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, born of violence yet embodying desire. Cronus and Rhea became the new rulers of the cosmos, and for a time there was stability. But Cronus had learned fear from his father. He received a prophecy that his own child would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Uranus. When Rhea gave birth, Cronus would take each infant and swallow it whole, not killing them, but keeping them imprisoned within his divine body. Rhea bore him 5 children this way: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, each consumed by their father as soon as they entered the world. When Rhea was pregnant with her 6th child, she could no longer bear to see her children devoured. She fled to the island of Crete, where she gave birth to Zeus in secret. To fool Cronus, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it as the newborn. Without suspicion, Cronus swallowed the stone, believing he had eliminated another threat. Meanwhile, Zeus was hidden in a cave on Mount Ida, nursed by the goat Amalthea, and protected by the warrior dancers called curetes, who clashed their weapons whenever the infant cried to mask the sound from Cronus's ears. Zeus grew quickly, as gods do, and when he reached maturity, he sought to free his siblings. With the help of the Oceanid Metis, who would later become his first wife, Zeus prepared a special drink that would make Cronus disgorge his children. Some versions of the myth say it was a powerful emetic, others that it was simply wine, then a new substance that Cronus had never encountered before. Whatever its nature, the drink worked. Cronus vomited up first the stone, which was later placed at Delphi as the omphalos, or navel stone marking the center of the world, and then Zeus's 5 siblings, fully grown and eager for vengeance. The war between the Titans and the new gods, called the Titanomachy, lasted 10 years. It was a cosmic battle that shaped the very landscape of the world. Mountains were hurled as weapons, seas boiled, and the earth shook with divine footsteps. Zeus released the Hecatoncheires, 100-handed giants, and the Cyclopes from Tartarus, where Cronus had imprisoned them. In gratitude, the Cyclopes gifted Zeus with his thunderbolts, Poseidon with his trident, and Hades with his helmet of invisibility. With these mighty weapons and newfound allies, the gods of the younger generation eventually triumphed over the Titans. Most of the defeated Titans were cast into Tartarus, bound in chains and guarded by the Hecatoncheires. But not all Titans had opposed Zeus. Oceanus remained neutral, while Prometheus and Epimetheus sided with the Olympians. After their victory, Zeus and his brothers divided the world among themselves. Zeus took the sky and overall leadership. Poseidon received the seas, and Hades was given the underworld. The earth itself and Mount Olympus would be shared by all, though Zeus claimed the mountain summit as his throne. Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, became the home of the gods. Rising nearly 10,000 feet above the surrounding landscape, its summit was said to pierce the heavens. Here, the Olympians lived in palaces of marble and gold, drinking nectar and eating ambrosia that preserved their immortality. The mountain was veiled in clouds, hiding divine splendor from mortal eyes, yet the gods could look down and observe the affairs of humans, intervening when they chose. Zeus established himself as the king of the gods, ruling with his thunderbolt that could shatter mountains and his aegis shield that created storms when shaken. Though powerful, he was not all-powerful. Even Zeus was subject to the Fates, the 3 goddesses who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life, immortal and mortal alike. He was also bound by oaths sworn on the river Styx, the boundary between the living world and the underworld, whose waters held such power that even gods feared to break promises made in its name. The 12 major Olympians formed a divine council, though the exact membership changed somewhat over time. Zeus's wife and sister Hera was queen of the gods and goddess of marriage, women, and childbirth. Despite her domain, her own marriage was tumultuous, as Zeus was notorious for his many affairs with goddesses and mortal women. These infidelities led to numerous divine and semi-divine offspring, and were the cause of Hera's vengeful wrath against many of Zeus's lovers and children. Poseidon, brother of Zeus, ruled the seas with his trident. He could calm the waters or create devastating storms and earthquakes by striking the earth. Known for his volatile temper, much like the element he controlled, Poseidon was also the creator of horses, which he formed from sea foam. Sailors prayed to him for safe passage, and coastal cities often dedicated their grandest temples to win his favor and protection against the destructive power of the sea. The third brother, Hades, is often misconstrued as an evil deity in modern interpretations. But to the ancient Greeks, he was not a malevolent god. As ruler of the underworld, he was certainly feared, but he was also respected as a just and strict administrator of death's inevitability. Hades rarely left his shadowy kingdom and seldom interacted with the other gods on Olympus. His most famous myth involves the abduction of Persephone, daughter of the harvest goddess Demeter, whose grief over her loss caused the first winter. Demeter herself was goddess of agriculture, grain, and fertility. Her worship was among the most important in ancient Greece, a civilization dependent on successful harvests. The Eleusinian mysteries, secret religious rites held in her honor, promised initiates special knowledge and blessings in the afterlife. Through her daughter Persephone's annual return from the underworld, Demeter brought spring and summer back to the world, creating the cycle of seasons that governed agricultural life. Apollo, son of Zeus and the Titaness Leto, embodied many aspects of Greek cultural ideals. God of music, poetry, archery, prophecy, and healing, he represented rational order and civilized arts. His oracle at Delphi was the most important prophetic site in the ancient world, where the Pythia, his priestess, delivered cryptic messages believed to come from Apollo himself. Nations and individuals alike sought guidance there before major decisions. Apollo was also associated with the sun, driving his golden chariot across the sky each day, though the older sun deity, Helios, maintained this role in some traditions. Apollo's twin sister Artemis was goddess of the hunt, wilderness, animals, and the moon. A virgin goddess who rejected marriage, she roamed the forests with her band of nymphs, protecting wildlife, yet also being a skilled hunter herself. Women in childbirth called upon her aid, as she had helped her mother deliver her own twin brother just moments after her own birth. Despite her independence, Artemis was fiercely protective of her mother and brother, punishing those who offended them or violated sacred boundaries. Athena, daughter of Zeus, sprang fully grown and armored from her father's head after he swallowed her pregnant mother, Metis. As goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, crafts, and reason, Athena embodied intellectual prowess rather than raw battle fury. Athens, Greece's greatest city-state, claimed her as their patron after she gifted them the olive tree in a contest against Poseidon. The magnificent Parthenon was built in her honor, housing a massive gold and ivory statue that stood nearly 40 feet tall. Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and desire, had dual origin stories. In one version, she was the daughter of Zeus and Dione, but in the older and more widely accepted tale, she arose from the sea foam created by Uranus's severed genitals, making her older than the Olympians. Despite being married to the smith god Hephaestus, Aphrodite had numerous lovers, most notably Ares, with whom she bore several children. Her worship involved aspects of sexuality and fertility, though she was also associated with more spiritual forms of love. Ares, god of war and bloodshed, represented the brutal and destructive aspects of conflict, in contrast to Athena's strategic approach. Though an Olympian, Ares was not particularly beloved by the Greeks, who saw his bloodthirsty nature as barbaric. Even his father Zeus expressed distaste for him in Homer's Iliad, calling him the most hateful of the gods. Nevertheless, Ares had his worshippers, particularly in Sparta, where martial prowess was the highest virtue. Hephaestus, the divine smith and craftsman, was the only Olympian with a physical imperfection. He was lame in one or both legs. According to some myths, Hera cast him from Olympus shortly after birth due to his deformity, leading to his fall into the sea, where he was raised by Thetis and Eurynome. Despite his rejection, Hephaestus became essential to the gods, crafting their weapons, jewelry, and palaces. His forge was said to be beneath Mount Etna in Sicily, where the volcano's eruptions were attributed to his hammering. Hermes, son of Zeus, and the nymph Maia served as messenger of the gods. Swift and clever, he was also patron of travelers, merchants, thieves, and orators. Legend holds that on the very day of his birth, Hermes invented the lyre and stole Apollo's cattle, displaying the mixture of creativity and trickery that characterized him. As Psychopomp, he guided souls to the underworld, moving freely between divine, mortal, and chthonic realms. The goddess Hestia represented the hearth and home, the center of domestic life. Though sometimes counted among the 12 Olympians, in later traditions she gave up her seat to Dionysus. As the firstborn child of Cronus and Rhea, she was both the oldest and, in character, the gentlest of the Olympian gods. Every home and temple had a hearth where a portion of each meal was offered to her, making her worship universal, even if less spectacular than that of other deities. Dionysus, god of wine, fertility, theater, and religious ecstasy, had an unusual birth. His mother, the mortal princess Semele, was tricked by a jealous Hera into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his full divine glory. No mortal could survive such a sight, and Semele was consumed by Zeus's lightning. Zeus rescued their unborn child and sewed him into his own thigh until Dionysus was ready to be born. This twice-born god later brought his mother back from the underworld and made her immortal. The myths surrounding these major deities intertwine with countless others involving minor gods, nature spirits, heroes, and mortals. The Greek pantheon was vast and complex, with hundreds of divine and semi-divine beings filling specific roles in the cosmic order. Nymphs inhabited natural features like trees, mountains, and bodies of water. The Muses inspired artistic creation across different disciplines. The Fates controlled destiny, while the Furies punished crimes against the natural order, especially those involving family bloodshed. Beyond the gods, Greek mythology celebrated heroes, mortals or demigods who accomplished extraordinary feats. Perhaps the greatest of these was Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules, son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene. Heracles' life was defined by incredible strength and tragic suffering, much of it caused by Hera's jealousy. His most famous exploits were the 12 labors, impossible tasks assigned to him as penance after he murdered his own wife and children during a fit of madness induced by Hera. These labors took Heracles across the known world and beyond, facing monsters and impossible challenges. He slew the invulnerable Nemean lion and wore its hide as armor. He destroyed the many-headed Hydra, whose heads would multiply when cut off. He cleaned the vast Augean stables in a single day by diverting 2 rivers. He captured the golden-horned Cyrenian hind, the Erymanthian boar, and the man-eating mares of Diomedes. He stole the girdle of the Amazon queen Hippolyta and the cattle of the 3-bodied giant Geryon. He obtained the golden apples of the Hesperides and captured Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog of the underworld, temporarily bringing him to the surface world before returning him to Hades. After completing these labors and many other adventures, Heracles' mortal life ended through tragic deception. His wife Deianira, believing she was using a love charm, gave him a shirt soaked in the poisonous blood of the centaur Nessus. The poison caused such agonizing pain that Heracles built his own funeral pyre and asked a friend to light it. As his mortal body burned away, Zeus brought him to Olympus and made him fully divine, reconciling him even with Hera. Another great hero was Theseus, associated primarily with Athens. Though not a son of Zeus, Theseus had divine heritage through his father Poseidon, or possibly the mortal king Aegeus, as the myths give him two potential fathers. His most famous deed was slaying the Minotaur, a creature with the head of a bull and body of a man who lived in the labyrinth on Crete. Every 9 years, Athens was required to send 7 young men and 7 young women as tribute to be devoured by the monster. Theseus volunteered to go with them, promising his father he would return with white sails if successful, rather than the usual black sails of mourning. With the help of the Cretan princess Ariadne, who gave him a ball of thread to find his way back through the maze, Theseus killed the Minotaur and led the Athenian youths to freedom. However, in his excitement at returning home, he forgot to change the sails from black to white. His father Aegeus, watching from a cliff and believing his son had perished, threw himself into the sea that now bears his name, the Aegean. Theseus went on to become king of Athens, instituting political reforms and unifying Attica, though his later years were marked by hubris and tragedy. Perhaps no hero's journey is more famous than that of Odysseus, king of Ithaca, whose 10-year voyage home after the Trojan War forms the subject of Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey. Though not as physically mighty as other heroes, Odysseus was renowned for his cunning intelligence. It was his idea to create the wooden horse that allowed the Greeks to finally enter Troy after a decade-long siege. Yet this same cleverness, combined with pride, led to divine punishment. After blinding the Cyclops Polyphemus, Odysseus boastfully revealed his name to the wounded monster. This allowed Polyphemus to call upon his father Poseidon to avenge him, resulting in the god's relentless persecution of Odysseus. The hero's journey home became an odyssey of hardship and wonder, as he encountered the enchantress Circe, who turned his men into swine, navigated between the deadly Scylla and Charybdis, resisted the enchanting song of the sirens, and spent 7 years as a captive of the nymph Calypso. When he finally returned home, he found his palace overrun with suitors seeking to marry his wife Penelope and claim his kingdom, leading to a bloody battle where he reclaimed what was his. The tragic house of Atreus produced several important mythological figures, including Agamemnon, who led the Greek forces in the Trojan War, and his brother Menelaus, whose wife Helen's abduction sparked the conflict. Their family was cursed through multiple generations, beginning when their father Atreus served his brother Thyestes a meal made from Thyestes' own children. The cycle of revenge continued when Agamemnon returned from Troy, only to be murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover. This in turn led their son Orestes to kill his own mother, for which he was pursued by the Furies until Athena intervened with the first murder trial, establishing a new system of justice to replace endless blood feuds. Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Trojan War, represented both the glory and the futility of the heroic ideal. Son of the mortal king Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, Achilles was nearly immortal. As an infant, his mother had dipped him in the river Styx, making his body invulnerable except for the heel by which she held him. Knowing he was fated to either live a long, unremarkable life or die young, but achieve eternal fame, Achilles chose glory. His wrath and his excellence in battle form the central themes of Homer's Iliad, culminating in his killing of the Trojan prince Hector to avenge the death of his beloved friend Patroclus. Shortly afterward, guided by the god Apollo, Paris shot an arrow that found Achilles' one vulnerable spot, fulfilling the prophecy of his early death, but eternal renown. The Trojan War itself stands as one of the richest sources of Greek mythology, blending historical events with divine interventions. The conflict began at a wedding to which the goddess of discord, Eris, was not invited. In revenge, she tossed among the guests a golden apple inscribed, "For the fairest." 3 goddesses claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. To resolve the dispute, Zeus appointed the Trojan prince Paris as judge. Each goddess offered him bribes. Hera promised political power, Athena offered military glory and wisdom, and Aphrodite tempted him with the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris chose Aphrodite's gift, leading him to abduct or seduce Helen from her husband Menelaus, igniting the war. The 10-year conflict saw mortals used almost as playing pieces by the gods, who took sides and intervened directly in battles. Apollo sent plague among the Greeks. Aphrodite rescued Paris from certain death at Menelaus's hands. Athena guided Diomedes to wound even the god Ares. Zeus enforced his will by forbidding divine intervention at key moments to allow fate to unfold as destined. The war ended only through Odysseus's stratagem of the wooden horse, which concealed elite Greek warriors inside a massive wooden structure presented as an offering to Athena. Despite the warnings of the priestess Cassandra, the Trojans brought the horse inside their walls, leading to their downfall when the hidden Greeks emerged at night to open the city gates. These myths about gods and heroes served many purposes in ancient Greek society. They explained natural phenomena, the changing of seasons through Persephone's annual journey between Earth and Underworld, the nighttime appearance of constellations through catasterism myths that placed people and creatures among the stars, the eruption of volcanoes through Hephaestus's forge. They established cultural norms and values, illustrating the consequences of hubris, excessive pride, through tales of mortals punished for challenging the gods, like Arachne, who was transformed into a spider after besting Athena in a weaving contest, or Niobe, who lost all her children after boasting that she was superior to the goddess Leto. The myths also explored fundamental human experiences and emotions. Tales of divine love affairs and jealousies reflected the complexities of human relationships. Stories of heroic quests spoke to the human desire to achieve something meaningful despite obstacles. Myths of transformation, like those collected in Ovid's Metamorphoses, address the experience of profound change and adaptation. Even the darkest myths served a purpose. Tales of the underworld and judgment after death encouraged ethical behavior in life. Greek mythology was not static, but evolved over centuries, incorporating influences from neighboring cultures and adapting to changing social conditions. Earlier, Chthonic deities associated with earth and fertility gradually gave way to the more anthropomorphic Olympians. Local cult practices sometimes preserved older versions of myths that differed from the pan-Hellenic narratives found in Homer and Hesiod. The mythic tradition continued to develop even as Greece transitioned from independent city-states to part of the Roman Empire, with Romans adopting and adapting Greek deities under new names. The gods of Greek mythology, though immortal and powerful, were not presented as perfect or purely good. They displayed very human emotions and flaws: jealousy, lust, anger, favoritism. Zeus was majestic but promiscuous. Apollo could be petty in his punishments. Hera's vengeance often fell on innocent victims of her husband's infidelity rather than on Zeus himself. Aphrodite used her power over desire to manipulate both gods and mortals. This complex moral landscape reflected the Greeks' sophisticated understanding of human nature and perhaps the recognition that power does not necessarily confer wisdom or virtue. Yet despite their flaws, the gods also embodied ideals toward which humans might aspire. Zeus represented justice, however imperfectly administered. Athena embodied wisdom and strategic thinking. Apollo stood for harmony, moderation, and artistic excellence. Artemis represented independence and the untamed spirit. In worshiping these deities, Greeks acknowledged both the reality of human imperfection and the possibility of reaching towards something higher. The relationship between gods and mortals in Greek mythology was complex. Humans were expected to honor the gods through proper worship and sacrifice, and hubris, challenging or claiming equality with the divine, was severely punished. Yet the boundary between mortal and divine was not absolute. Heroes with divine parentage existed in an intermediate category. Exceptional humans like Heracles could be elevated to godhood. Gods occasionally fell in love with mortals, producing children who inherited aspects of both worlds. This permeability suggested that humanity had divine potential, even if most would never fully realize it. Fate played a crucial role in Greek mythology, operating as a force that even the gods could not easily override. The three Moirai, or Fates, Clotho, who spun the thread of life, Lachesis, who measured it, and Atropos, who cut it, determined the destiny of every being. Prophecies, once given, would inevitably come to pass, though often in unexpected ways. When mortals or gods tried to circumvent prophecy, their very actions sometimes brought about the foretold outcome, as when Cronus's attempt to prevent his children from overthrowing him led directly to Zeus's victory. Yet fate in Greek mythology was not pure determinism. Characters still made choices within the constraints of destiny. Achilles chose glory, knowing it meant early death. Odysseus chose to reveal his name to the Cyclops, bringing Poseidon's wrath upon himself. The heroes who undertook quests did so voluntarily, even when facing seemingly impossible odds. This tension between fate and free will reflected the Greeks' nuanced understanding of human agency operating within larger cosmic patterns that could not be entirely controlled. Greek myths often focused on boundaries and their transgression, between gods and mortals, between the living and the dead, between civilized spaces and wilderness. Boundary crossers like Hermes moved between worlds. Heroes like Orpheus and Heracles ventured into the underworld and returned, challenging death's finality. Some mortals were punished for overstepping limits, while others were rewarded for exceptional deeds that expanded human potential. These stories explored fundamental questions about human limitations and possibilities, about what is fixed in the cosmic order, and what can be changed through courage, cleverness, or divine favor. The ancient Greeks did not necessarily approach their myths as literal truth in the way modern religious fundamentalists might interpret sacred texts. The poet Xenophanes, as early as the 6th century BCE, criticized the anthropomorphic depiction of gods, noting that different cultures envisioned deities resembling themselves. Philosophers like Plato and the Stoics interpreted myths allegorically, seeking deeper meanings beneath the surface narratives. Ordinary Greeks likely varied in their degree of literal belief, much as people today hold different views about religious stories. What mattered most was participation in rituals that honored the gods and connected communities to cosmic powers and to their shared cultural heritage. Despite this flexible approach to mythic truth, the Greeks took their religious practices very seriously. Festivals honoring various deities punctuated the calendar, combining religious observance with civic identity. The most important Pan-Hellenic festival, the Olympic Games, began as a religious event dedicated to Zeus. Temples served not primarily as gathering places for worshippers, but as houses for divine images and treasuries for offerings. Sacrifices followed precise protocols to avoid offense. Oracles were consulted before major decisions. The gods were understood to be present and active in the world, capable of blessing or punishing human communities based on their behavior. The myths themselves were transmitted through multiple channels. Epic poems, like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and Hesiod's Theogony, provided extensive narratives about gods and heroes. Lyric poetry explored mythic themes in more personal ways. Tragic playwrights, like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, dramatized mythic stories, sometimes offering new psychological insights or questioning traditional interpretations. Visual arts depicted mythic scenes on pottery, temple friezes, and sculptures. Oral storytelling around hearths and at festivals kept myths alive among those who could not read written texts. As Greek culture spread through trade, colonization, and conquest, so did its mythology. The Hellenistic era, following Alexander the Great's campaigns, saw Greek myths and gods adopted and adapted across much of the Mediterranean and Near East, blending with local traditions. The Roman conquest of Greece led not to suppression of Greek culture, but to its adoption by Roman elites, who identified their native gods with Greek counterparts: Jupiter with Zeus, Juno with Hera, Venus with Aphrodite. Even as Greek political power waned, Greek mythology continued to influence literature, art, and thought throughout the Roman world. The rise of Christianity gradually displaced traditional Greek religious practices, with temples converted to churches and festivals transformed into Christian observances. Yet the myths themselves never completely disappeared from cultural memory. Medieval scholars preserved and sometimes reinterpreted ancient texts. Renaissance humanists rediscovered classical learning and integrated mythic themes into art and literature. The Enlightenment found philosophical value in these ancient stories, while Romanticism celebrated their emotional and imaginative power. Even in our modern scientific age, Greek myths continue to inspire creative works and provide metaphors for human experience. Why do these ancient stories continue to resonate? perhaps because they address perennial human concerns, the search for meaning in a sometimes chaotic world, the tension between individual desires and social responsibilities, the fear of death and hope for something beyond, the struggle to understand natural forces beyond human control. The Greek gods and heroes, despite their supernatural powers, experience recognizably human emotions and conflicts. Their stories speak to both the limitations of mortality and the potential for greatness within those limitations. The enduring legacy of Greek mythology extends far beyond direct retellings of ancient stories. Our language is filled with references that many use without realizing their mythic origins. Herculean tasks, Achilles' heel, Pandora's box, narcissism, an Odyssey, the Midas touch. Astronomical bodies bear the names of gods, heroes, and monsters from Greek myths. Psychological complexes like the Oedipus and Electra complexes derive from mythic figures. Even modern superhero narratives often follow patterns established in ancient hero tales, with exceptional individuals using their powers to protect ordinary people from threats they cannot face alone. Human beings may recognize themselves in these stories because the Greeks created gods and heroes who, despite their extraordinary powers, experienced the full range of human emotions and struggles. Zeus might hurl thunderbolts, but he also felt desire, jealousy, and pride. Achilles was nearly invincible, yet vulnerability, both physical and emotional, defined his story. This blend of the superhuman and the deeply human makes these ancient tales accessible even across millennia of cultural change. The myths were not just stories, but lived experiences for the ancient Greeks, embedded in the landscape they inhabited. Travelers to Greece today can still visit the sites associated with mythic events. The Palace of Knossos on Crete, where the Minotaur was said to dwell in the labyrinth. The sanctuary at Delphi, where Apollo's oracle spoke. The spring at Lerna, where Heracles fought the Hydra. Mountains, rivers, caves, and islands all had their associated stories, creating a sacred geography where myth and physical reality intertwined. To walk through Greece was to move through layers of narrative that gave meaning to every feature of the natural world. While the Olympian gods dominated the official religion of the city-states, other divine forces existed at the boundaries of Greek religious experience. Mystery cults offered initiates secret knowledge and special divine protection. The Eleusinian mysteries, centered on Demeter and Persephone, promised participants a blessed afterlife. The Dionysian mysteries celebrated ecstatic release from social constraints, allowing worshippers to experience divine possession through wine, music, and dance. These mystery religions recognize dimensions of human spiritual need that the more formal Olympian cults did not always address. The desire for personal divine connection, for transcendent experience, and for reassurance about what might lie beyond death. Death and the afterlife were complex subjects in Greek mythology. The underworld, ruled by Hades and Persephone, was neither heaven nor hell in the Christian sense, but a shadowy realm where most souls continued a diminished existence. The dead were believed to cross the river Styx, guided by Hermes and transported by the ferryman Charon, who required payment, a coin placed in the mouth of the corpse during funeral rites. Within the underworld were different regions: the Elysian fields, where heroes and the virtuous enjoyed pleasant afterlives; Tartarus, where the wicked suffered punishment; and the Asphodel meadows, where ordinary souls dwelled in a kind of ghostly half-life. The most detailed account of the Greek underworld appears in Book Dasainth of Homer's Odyssey, when Odysseus performs a ritual to communicate with the dead. He encounters the blind prophet Tiresias, from whom he seeks advice for his journey home, but also meets the shades of his mother, former comrades from the Trojan War, and famous figures from the past. Most of these spirits seem melancholy, lamenting their separation from the world of the living. The ghost of Achilles tells Odysseus he would rather be a living servant to a poor master than king of all the dead, suggesting that even the greatest heroes found little comfort in the afterlife the Greeks imagined. Not all Greek myths end in tragedy or loss. Some celebrate the triumph of intelligence over brute force, like the story of Daedalus. This brilliant Athenian craftsman and inventor found himself imprisoned with his son Icarus in a tower on Crete by King Minos, who wished to keep Daedalus's knowledge of the labyrinth secret. Unable to escape by land or sea, which Minos controlled, Daedalus created wings of feathers, wax, and twine for himself and his son. Before they flew to freedom, he warned Icarus not to fly too close to the sun, which would melt the wax, nor too close to the sea, which would dampen the feathers. In youthful exuberance, Icarus ignored his father's warning about the sun, flew too high, and plunged to his death when his wings disintegrated. Daedalus, maintaining the middle path, successfully escaped to Sicily. The myth cautions against both excessive ambition and the failure to heed wisdom, while still celebrating human ingenuity and the drive for freedom. Other myths explore the consequences of broken promises and the sanctity of oaths. Orpheus, the legendary musician whose songs could charm animals, trees, and even rocks, used his gift to persuade Hades and Persephone to release his dead wife Eurydice back to the world of the living. The rulers of the underworld agreed on one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead of Eurydice on the path upward and not look back until they had both reached the upper world. Just as they neared their destination, Orpheus's anxiety overcame him, and he turned to confirm his wife was still behind him. Having broken the condition, he watched helplessly as Eurydice was drawn back into the depths, lost to him forever. In his grief, Orpheus wandered singing songs of such sorrow that he angered the Maenads, female followers of Dionysus, who tore him to pieces. Yet even in death, his severed head continued to sing as it floated down the river Hebrus to the sea. Greek mythology is also populated with monsters and hybrid creatures that challenged heroes and sometimes served as guardians of boundaries between worlds. The Minotaur, with its bull's head and man's body, dwelled at the center of the labyrinth, itself a liminal space between order and chaos. The Chimera combined lion, goat, and serpent in one body, breathing fire that the hero Bellerophon quenched with a lump of lead on his spear tip while mounted on the winged horse Pegasus. The Sphinx posed riddles at the entrance to Thebes, devouring those who failed to answer correctly until Oedipus solved her famous question about the creature that walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening. These monsters often represented aspects of the natural world or human nature that seemed threatening or incomprehensible, embodying fears that heroes needed to confront and overcome. Among the most fascinating hybrid beings were the centaurs, with human torsos and heads atop horse bodies. Most centaurs were wild and uncivilized, representing the tension between human rationality and animal instinct. Their legendary battle with the Lapiths, depicted on the Parthenon metopes, began when the centaur Eurytion attempted to carry off the bride at a wedding to which centaurs had been invited. This myth reflected anxiety about the fragility of civilization and the potential for chaos to erupt when boundaries are crossed. Yet not all centaurs fit this pattern. Chiron, raised by Apollo and Artemis, was wise, just, and skilled in medicine, music, archery, and prophecy. As tutor to heroes, including Achilles, Jason, and Asclepius, Chiron represented the positive integration of human intellect with natural vitality. Equally complex were the Amazons, a race of warrior women who lived at the edges of the known world. They appeared in several hero myths. Heracles obtained the girdle of their queen Hippolyta as his ninth labor. Theseus abducted or married the Amazon Antiope, or Hippolyta in some versions. And Achilles killed the Amazon queen Penthesilea during the Trojan War, only to fall in love with her as she died. Greek vase paintings often showed Amazons dressed like Greek hoplites, but wielding distinctive crescent-shaped shields and Scythian-style bows, marking them as both familiar and foreign. The myths about these female warriors, who governed themselves without men and excelled in traditionally masculine activities, allowed Greeks to explore questions about gender roles and the relationship between Greek civilization and foreign cultures. They also reflected historical contacts with nomadic peoples from the Eurasian steppes, where archaeological evidence suggests women did sometimes participate in warfare. The relationship between mortals and immortals often appears unbalanced in Greek mythology, with humans subject to divine whims and punishments. Yet there were mechanisms by which mortals could gain divine favor or even challenge the gods. Proper sacrifice and ritual observance could win divine protection. Exceptional humans might receive divine gifts, like Asclepius's healing skills from Apollo, or Perseus's tools for defeating Medusa from Athena and Hermes. Heroes of divine parentage inherited godlike qualities. A few fortunate mortals were even brought to Olympus and made immortal, like Heracles after his death, or Ganymede, the beautiful youth whom Zeus carried off to be his cupbearer. Occasionally, mortals directly challenged divine authority, though rarely with positive outcomes. Arachne claimed her weaving surpassed Athena's and was transformed into a spider for her hubris. The satyr Marsyas challenged Apollo to a music contest and was flayed alive after losing. The hunter Actaeon accidentally saw Artemis bathing and was turned into a stag to be torn apart by his own hounds. The maiden Medusa was changed into a gorgon with snakes for hair and a petrifying gaze after being violated by Poseidon in Athena's temple. These tales reinforce the vast gap between gods and humans while simultaneously suggesting that the gap could sometimes be bridged, whether through exceptional talent, divine favor, or transgressive action. Greek myths often explore gender and sexuality in ways that reflect but sometimes challenge ancient social norms. Female deities wielded significant power within their domains. Athena in wisdom and warfare, Artemis in the wilderness, Demeter over agriculture, Persephone in the underworld. Mortal women in myths sometimes displayed remarkable agency despite their limited rights in Greek society. Penelope preserved her household through cunning during Odysseus's long absence. Clytemnestra ruled Mycenae after arranging her husband Agamemnon's murder. Antigone defied King Creon's decree to give her brother proper funeral rites, placing divine law above human authority. Sexual relationships in Greek mythology took many forms beyond the marital norm. Zeus had numerous male and female lovers, in addition to his wife Hera. Apollo loved the youth Hyacinthus, who was transformed into a flower after a tragic accident. The nymph Daphne escaped Apollo's pursuit by being changed into a laurel tree. Hermaphroditus, son of Hermes and Aphrodite, merged bodies with the nymph Salmacis to become a being of dual gender. These stories provided frameworks for understanding the complex realities of human desire and identity, while their retelling in different contexts allowed for varying interpretations of their moral or social implications. Among the most poignant myths are those involving transformations, where beings change form as a result of divine intervention. These metamorphoses sometimes offered escape from danger. The nymph Syrinx became a stand of marsh reeds to avoid Pan's unwanted advances, while Daphne turned into a laurel tree to escape Apollo. Other transformations were punishments. Lycaon became a wolf after serving human flesh to Zeus to test his divinity. Narcissus, who rejected all romantic overtures, wasted away staring at his own reflection and became the flower that bears his name. Still, others were acts of commemoration. Hyacinthus and Adonis, beautiful youths who died tragically, were transformed into flowers by their divine lovers. These tales of shape-shifting reflected the Greeks' awareness of constant change in the natural world and in human experience, suggesting that identity itself was fluid rather than fixed. The Trojan War cycle continued to generate stories beyond the events depicted in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. The Returns, a lost epic poem known from summaries, describe the often troubled journeys home of other Greek heroes. Ajax the Lesser was drowned by Poseidon for boasting he would survive despite the god's will. Agamemnon reached his palace only to be murdered. Diomedes found his wife unfaithful and left for Italy. The house of Atreus continued its cycle of violence when Orestes, son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, killed his mother and her lover to avenge his father, then was pursued by the Furies until Athena established the Areopagus court in Athens to try homicide cases. Meanwhile, Aeneas escaped the destruction of Troy, carrying his father on his back and leading a group of survivors who eventually reached Italy, establishing the connection between Trojan and Roman origins later elaborated by Virgil in the Aeneid. The mythic past was not entirely separate from historical reality for the Greeks. They understood that some stories occurred in a remote age of heroes that had ended, yet they traced their family lineages, city foundations, and religious institutions back to these same myths. The Trojan War, which modern archaeology suggests may reflect an actual Bronze Age conflict, marked the end of the heroic age in Greek consciousness. Hesiod described 5 successive ages of humanity: golden, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron, the last being his own era, which he characterized as hardship-filled but not without hope. This view of history as both cyclical and degenerative differed from modern linear conceptions of historical progress. Different regions of Greece maintained their own local variants of widely known myths, often giving prominence to heroes and events associated with their territories. Athens celebrated Theseus, while Thebes had its complex of myths surrounding Oedipus and his descendants. Sparta honored the Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, twin brothers of Helen who became stars in the sky. Rhodes claimed Helios, the sun god, as its patron. These local traditions were not necessarily seen as contradicting Pan-Hellenic myths, but as complementing them, providing additional details or alternative perspectives that enhance the richness of the shared mythic heritage while reinforcing local identity and pride. As Greek culture spread throughout the Mediterranean and Near East following Alexander the Great's conquests, Greek mythological figures sometimes merged with local deities in a process called syncretism. The Egyptian goddess Isis became associated with Demeter, while Zeus was identified with the Egyptian Ammon. Later, under Roman rule, Greek deities were systematically equated with Roman gods. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune, and so on. Yet these were not simple one-to-one translations. Each cultural context added new dimensions to the divine figures, adapting them to different social needs and religious sensibilities. The Romans, for instance, emphasized Jupiter's role as patron of the state more than the Greeks had done with Zeus. Greek myths did not exist only in narrative form, but permeated all aspects of ancient visual and performative arts. Vase paintings depicted mythological scenes with standardized iconography that allowed viewers to recognize specific stories and characters. Sculptors created statues of gods embodying idealized human forms and heroes captured in moments of action. Architectural friezes, like those on the Parthenon, presented mythic narratives in sequential scenes. Theaters staged tragedies and comedies drawn from or inspired by mythological material. Even household items might be decorated with mythic motifs, bringing these stories into daily life and domestic spaces. The theater festival of Dionysia in Athens was particularly important for the public engagement with myth. Tragic playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides drew from the common stock of mythological narratives, but adapted them to explore contemporary social and political issues. Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy examined how justice evolves from personal vengeance to civic institution. Sophocles' Antigone pitted family obligation against state authority. Euripides often portrayed gods as ambiguous figures and highlighted the suffering of marginal characters like foreign women captured in war. Through these dramatic treatments, myths remained vital and relevant, capable of generating new meanings for each generation. Philosophical interpretations of myths emerged as Greek intellectual culture developed. Some pre-Socratic philosophers criticized traditional myths as immoral or illogical. Xenophanes objected to Homer and Hesiod's portrayal of gods behaving badly, while Heraclitus found allegorical meanings beneath the surface narratives. The sophists treated myths as human constructions, useful for teaching moral lessons, but not necessarily reflecting cosmic realities. Plato used mythic elements in his philosophical dialogues, but also critiqued poetry that depicted divine immorality as harmful to the ideal state. Later, Stoic philosophers interpreted myths allegorically, finding in them symbolic expressions of natural phenomena or ethical principles. The Orphic tradition represented an alternative current in Greek religious thought that influenced later philosophical movements. Named after the legendary musician Orpheus, this mystical tradition focused on the soul's journey and potential liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. Orphic creation myths differed from the Hesiodic account, featuring the dismemberment and rebirth of Dionysus Zagreus. Orphic practitioners followed dietary restrictions, avoided animal sacrifice, and used sacred texts containing instructions for the afterlife journey. Elements of Orphic thought influenced Pythagoreanism and later Platonic philosophy, particularly regarding the soul's immortality and the body as a kind of prison from which the soul seeks release. Monsters in Greek mythology often served as obstacles that heroes needed to overcome, but they also embodied primal fears and represented aspects of nature or human psychology that seemed threatening. The many-headed Hydra that Heracles battled symbolize problems that multiply when confronted directly. The sirens who nearly lured Odysseus's crew to their deaths represented the dangerous seduction of knowledge or pleasure that leads to self-destruction. Scylla and Charybdis, the sea monsters between which Odysseus had to navigate, embodied the impossible choices that sometimes confront humans. By defeating or escaping these monsters, heroes demonstrated that chaos could be overcome through courage, intelligence, divine assistance, or some combination of these qualities. Among the most terrifying creatures in Greek mythology were the three Gorgons, sisters with living venomous snakes for hair, brazen claws, and faces so hideous that looking directly at them turned the viewer to stone. Medusa, the only mortal among them, was beheaded by Perseus with help from Athena and Hermes. Even after death, her severed head retained its petrifying power, which Perseus used to defeat enemies before giving it to Athena, who placed it on her Aegis shield. Blood from the left side of Medusa's neck was a deadly poison, while blood from her right side could resurrect the dead. This duality reflected the Greek understanding of pharmakon, a substance that could be either remedy or poison depending on its use, and the thin line between life-giving and life-taking forces in nature. Fantastical creatures were not always threatening in Greek mythology. Some served as helpers or companions to gods or heroes. The winged horse Pegasus, born from Medusa's blood, carried the hero Bellerophon in his fight against the Chimera, and later served Zeus by bringing lightning bolts from Hephaestus's forge. The immortal horses Xanthus and Balius, given to Peleus as a wedding gift and passed to his son Achilles, could speak human language and prophesied their master's death. The golden-fleeced ram Chrysomalos rescued the children Phrixus and Helle from being sacrificed, flying them to safety across the strait that would be named the Hellespont after Helle fell into the waters. These benevolent creatures often possessed divine origins or gifts that they placed in service to worthy mortals. Some of the most beloved myths involve interactions between humans and animals or nature spirits. The hunter Actaeon stumbled upon Artemis bathing and was transformed into a stag, then torn apart by his own hounds, a tale reflecting the dangers of violating sacred boundaries in the wilderness. Midas received the power to turn anything he touched to gold, then learned the terrible consequences when this extended to his food and his beloved daughter. Echo, a nymph who could only repeat the last words spoken to her, wasted away from unrequited love for Narcissus until only her voice remained. These stories explored human relationships with the natural world, suggesting that prosperity, communication, and even identity itself depended on proper respect for natural forces and limitations. Greek mythology includes numerous instances of mortals raised to divine or semi-divine status. Asclepius, son of Apollo, became so skilled in medicine that he could resurrect the dead, causing Hades to complain to Zeus that the natural order was being disturbed. Zeus struck Asclepius with a thunderbolt, but then placed him among the stars as the constellation Ophiuchus. The mortal Psyche, whose name means soul, underwent trials imposed by a jealous Aphrodite before being granted immortality to remain with her husband Eros. Ariadne, abandoned by Theseus after helping him defeat the Minotaur, was discovered by Dionysus, who married her and made her immortal. These ascensions suggested that exceptional humans could transcend their mortal limitations through divine favor, great achievement, or profound love. The boundary between history and myth blurred in Greek consciousness. Some mythic figures, like Theseus, were believed to have been actual historical kings whose deeds became legendary. The poet Homer was considered by many Greeks to have been a real person, though 7 different cities claimed to be his birthplace. The Trojan War, central to so much Greek mythology, left archaeological evidence at the site of Troy, Hisarlik in modern Turkey, though the details of the conflict differed from Homer's account. This interweaving of myth and history created a sense of cultural continuity, linking the Greeks of the classical period with their heroic ancestors, validating social institutions and practices through stories of their legendary origins. Weather phenomena and natural disasters often had mythological explanations. Thunder and lightning came from Zeus's thunderbolt. Earthquakes were caused by Poseidon striking the ground with his trident, or by the imprisoned Titan Enceladus turning beneath Mount Etna. Storms at sea reflected Poseidon's anger. The change of seasons resulted from Demeter's grief during the months her daughter Persephone spent in the underworld. These explanations gave cosmic significance to natural events and suggested that proper worship might mitigate their destructive effects. Yet Greek mythology did not preclude what we would now call scientific inquiry. Indeed, natural philosophers sought rational explanations for the same phenomena that myths addressed, sometimes existing alongside mythic interpretations rather than replacing them entirely. Greek mythology demonstrates remarkable psychological insight, exploring the consequences of common human failings. Hubris, or excessive pride, leads to downfall in countless myths, from Icarus flying too close to the sun to Niobe boasting that her 14 children made her superior to the goddess Leto, who had only 2. The tale of Erysichthon, who cut down trees in a grove sacred to Demeter and was punished with insatiable hunger that led him to eventually consume himself, illustrates the self-destructive nature of greed. Narcissus, unable to love others because of his absorption with his own beauty, wastes away staring at his reflection. These cautionary tales provided frameworks for understanding how unchecked emotion or excessive self-regard could lead to suffering. Prophecy plays a crucial role in many Greek myths, often with ironically self-fulfilling outcomes. Acrisius, king of Argos, learned from an oracle that his grandson would kill him. To prevent this, he imprisoned his daughter Danae in a bronze chamber, but Zeus came to her as a shower of gold, leading to the birth of Perseus. Years later, Perseus accidentally killed Acrisius with a discus during athletic games. King Laius of Thebes was told his son would kill him, so he and his wife Jocasta ordered their infant exposed on a mountainside. The child Oedipus was rescued and raised in Corinth, unaware of his origins. As an adult, he unwittingly killed Laius at a crossroads and later married Jocasta. These stories suggest that fate cannot be escaped through human calculation or control. Indeed, attempts to circumvent destiny often become the means of its fulfillment. Hospitality, xenia, was a sacred value in Greek culture, protected by Zeus Xenios, god of travelers. Many myths illustrate the consequences of violating or honoring these customs. When Odysseus arrived on Phaeacia shipwrecked and naked, Princess Nausicaa and her parents provided clothing, food, entertainment, gifts, and safe passage home, demonstrating perfect hospitality. In contrast, the Cyclops Polyphemus ignored the obligations of a host and ate several of Odysseus's men, resulting in his being blinded. Baucis and Philemon, an elderly couple who warmly welcomed disguised gods, Zeus and Hermes, when wealthy neighbors turned them away, were rewarded with a wish that they might die together, while their inhospitable community was destroyed by a flood. These stories reinforce the practical ethics of a society where travelers depended on others' goodwill for survival. Some Greek myths seem to preserve memories of actual historical transitions and cultural changes. The battle between the Olympians and Titans might reflect the replacement of older religious systems with newer forms of worship as Greek-speaking peoples moved into the Mediterranean region. Theseus's unification of Attica under Athenian leadership condenses into mythic form a lengthy historical process of political consolidation. The widespread motif of heroes killing monsters or bandits who terrorize travelers likely reflects the gradual establishment of safer trade routes and more stable political control in the early Greek world. In this way, myths served as cultural memory, preserving in symbolic form significant transitions that shaped Greek identity. Women in Greek mythology occupy complex and sometimes contradictory positions. Female deities, like Athena and Artemis, exemplify power and independence, while mortal women often face significant constraints. Yet even within these limitations, female characters display remarkable agency and wisdom. Penelope preserves her household through intelligence and tactical delays during the 20 years of Odysseus's absence. Clytemnestra rules Mycenae after arranging her husband's murder, though she eventually faces retribution. Medea, betrayed by Jason after helping him obtain the Golden Fleece, exacts a terrible vengeance that costs her own children but preserves her autonomy. These portrayals reflect the ambivalent status of women in Greek society, officially limited in rights and public roles, yet often wielding significant informal influence within their spheres. The concept of the hero evolved throughout Greek cultural history. The earliest heroes, like Heracles, performed feats of superhuman strength, cleared the land of monsters, and expanded the boundaries of civilized space. Later figures like Odysseus embodied cunning intelligence, metis, as much as physical prowess. Tragic heroes like Oedipus demonstrated how even good intentions and exceptional qualities could lead to disaster through fate or hidden flaws. The ideal of heroism was complex. Heroes were admired for their excellence, arete, but often displayed troubling ethical lapses by modern standards. Achilles' treatment of Hector's body, dragging it around Troy's walls, showed the potential for greatness to become cruelty when unchecked by compassion or moderation. This ambivalence about heroic qualities reflected Greek awareness of both the necessity and the dangers of exceptional individuals within social structures. Dreams and visions frequently serve as conduits between the mortal and divine realms in Greek mythology. Agamemnon receives a false dream from Zeus, promising victory to lure him into battle. Penelope's dreams of her absent husband prove prophetic. Incubation, the practice of sleeping in temples to receive divine guidance through dreams, was an established ritual, especially in sanctuaries of Asclepius, where healing dreams were sought. The Greeks recognized dreams as potentially meaningful, yet ambiguous, requiring interpretation to separate true divine messages from ordinary mental phenomena or deceptive illusions. This balanced approach, neither dismissing dreams as meaningless nor accepting them uncritically, characterized the practical wisdom of Greek engagement with the numinous. The motif of the quest appears in numerous Greek myths, providing a narrative structure that combines adventure, self-discovery, and the establishment of new social connections. Jason and the Argonauts' voyage to obtain the Golden Fleece brings together heroes from throughout the Greek world, creating networks of obligation and alliance. Perseus's mission to kill Medusa leads him to discover his divine heritage and establish his worthiness as a hero. Psyche's search for her lost husband Eros transforms her from a passive object of beauty to an active agent who earns immortality through her determination and love. These journey narratives reflect the Greek experience as seafarers and colonizers who establish connections throughout the Mediterranean, as well as the universal human experience of facing challenges that reveal character and forge identity. Artistic depictions of Greek myths evolved over centuries, reflecting changing aesthetic preferences and cultural values. Archaic period art often presented mythic scenes with formal stylization and symbolic elements. Classical era sculptures and vase paintings aimed for idealized naturalism within clearly defined compositional schemes. Hellenistic artists introduced greater emotion, drama, and individualized expression. Roman copies and adaptations sometimes modified Greek originals to emphasize different aspects of the same myths. These visual traditions established iconographic conventions. Zeus with his thunderbolt, Poseidon with his trident, Heracles with his lion skin and club, that made mythic references immediately recognizable across different media and contexts, creating a shared visual language that complemented oral and written narratives. Music and poetry were inseparably linked in ancient Greek culture, and myths often reference this connection. Apollo played the cithara, a type of lyre, while his son, Orpheus's music, was so beautiful it could charm animals, trees, and even stones. The nine muses presided over different forms of artistic and intellectual expression. Calliope over epic poetry, Clio over history, Euterpe over lyric poetry and music, and so on. Competitive musical performances formed part of religious festivals like the Pythian Games at Delphi. Through these associations, myths validated the importance of artistic expression in Greek society, while suggesting its origins in divine inspiration. The poet, or musician, served as a channel for voices beyond ordinary human capacity. The influence of Greek mythology extended far beyond the ancient world. Medieval European scholars preserved classical texts, though often interpreting them through Christian frameworks that transformed gods into demons or allegorical figures. Renaissance humanists rediscovered ancient sources more directly, inspiring new artistic and literary productions based on mythological themes. Baroque and neoclassical artists found in these stories perfect vehicles for technical virtuosity and emotional expression. The Romantic movement embraced Greek mythology's passionate narratives and connection to primal natural forces, Even modern psychological theory drew on mythic figures, as in Freud's concept of the Oedipus complex or Jung's use of archetypes. This continuous reinterpretation demonstrates how Greek myths function as a cultural language adaptable to different historical circumstances and intellectual needs. Modern literature continues to engage with Greek mythology through direct retellings, subtle allusions, and creative reimaginings. James Joyce's Ulysses transposes the structure of Odysseus's journey onto a single day in Dublin. Jean Anouilh's Antigone reimagines Sophocles' play in the context of resistance to authoritarianism. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series introduces young readers to Greek myths in contemporary settings. These adaptations speak to the enduring relevance of ancient narratives that address fundamental human experiences: the search for identity, the tension between individual desire and social obligation, the confrontation with mortality, the possibility of transcendence. Greek myths provide both familiar reference points and flexible frameworks for exploring these perennial concerns in new contexts. Similarly, visual media, from painting to film and television, find rich material in Greek mythology. Pre-Raphaelite artists depicted mythological subjects with romantic intensity and detailed naturalism. Picasso's Minotauromachy used the bull-headed monster as a complex personal and political symbol. Hollywood films, from Clash of the Titans to Troy, adapt ancient stories for modern audiences, sometimes emphasizing spectacle over philosophical depth, but nevertheless maintaining cultural awareness of these narratives. Video games allow players to interact directly with mythological worlds and characters. These diverse artistic engagements ensure that Greek myths remain living cultural resources rather than merely historical artifacts, continuously renewed through creative reinterpretation. Greek mythology's endurance suggests it addresses something fundamental in human experience. These stories explore the tension between freedom and fate, illustrating how characters make choices within constraints they cannot control, a situation all humans face. They examine the complexity of family relationships, where love and obligation intertwine with jealousy, resentment, and intergenerational conflict. They confront the reality of mortality and the human desire to achieve something that outlasts an individual life, whether through heroic deeds, artistic creation, or biological reproduction. They probe the boundaries of the human, imagining what lies beyond ordinary experience in the realms of gods, monsters, or the dead. In all these explorations, Greek myths do not offer simple answers, but rather frame questions that each generation must address anew. The Greek mythic tradition was never monolithic, but encompassed multiple versions of stories, regional variations, and evolving interpretations. This multiplicity permitted different communities to adapt shared narratives to local circumstances and allowed individuals to find personal meaning in communal tales. The same flexibility makes these myths valuable for contemporary engagement with questions of identity, ethics, and meaning. They provide not rigid prescriptions, but rich symbolic resources for making sense of complex experiences. The gods and heroes of ancient Greece speak to us not as fixed icons, but as living figures whose stories continue to unfold in dialogue with each new cultural context and individual encounter. From creation myths that explained how the world began to hero tales that modeled possibilities for human excellence, from divine conflicts that reflected social and political tensions, to love stories that explored the power and complexity of desire. Greek mythology offered ancient audiences frameworks for understanding their world. Today, these same stories continue to illuminate human experience, not because we share the religious beliefs of ancient Greeks, but because we share the human condition they explored so richly through narrative. The gods may no longer receive sacrifices, but they live on as symbols of natural forces, psychological drives, and social dynamics that shape our lives as they shape those of people thousands of years ago. As we now drift toward the edge of sleep, let these ancient stories settle in your mind like stars appearing in the evening sky. The cosmos, the Greeks imagined, was filled with meaning. Each constellation held a story. Each planet was associated with a deity. The very landscape bore the marks of mythic events. Mount Olympus still stands, its peak often wreathed in clouds, as if still hiding divine presences. The Mediterranean still separates Europe from Africa and Asia, waters once sailed by heroes seeking glory or simply trying to return home. The olive trees of Greece still produce fruit and oil, gifts from Athena that sustain life as they have for millennia. These myths remind us that humans have always sought to understand our place in a world larger than ourselves, a world both beautiful and terrible, nurturing and dangerous. The Greeks personified natural forces and abstract principles as gods with human forms and emotions, making the cosmos simultaneously more comprehensible and more mysterious. Comprehensible because these divine beings had recognizable motivations and relationships. Mysterious because their power and knowledge far exceeded mortal limits. This balance between the familiar and the numinous created a worldview where everyday life was infused with sacred significance. The farmer plowing fields participated in Demeter's cycle of growth and harvest. The sailor, watching the stars for navigation, glimpsed constellations that commemorated heroes and monsters. The traveler, stopping at a roadside shrine, honored Hermes, protector of journeys. Through mythology, the Greeks explored fundamental questions. What forces shape human destiny? How should we respond to suffering and loss? What constitutes a good life? What endures beyond death? They created not a single authoritative answer to these questions, but a rich tapestry of narratives that illuminated different aspects of experience. The myths acknowledged both human agency and its limitations, celebrated excellence while warning against excess, recognized the beauty of the world while not flinching from its terrors. This complex vision neither denied difficulties nor surrendered to despair, finding meaning in the ongoing struggle to live with wisdom and grace within the boundaries of mortality. Perhaps this is why Greek myths continue to resonate. They speak to our hunger for stories that acknowledge life's difficulties while affirming its value. They remind us that wonder and horror often intertwine, that beauty emerges from suffering, that endings give birth to new beginnings. The eternal cycle of Persephone's descent and return creates both winter's barrenness and spring's renewal. Pandora's jar releases countless ills but preserves hope. From chaos emerge form and meaning. Through the myths, we glimpse possibilities for finding purpose, not despite life's challenges, but through engaging with them fully. As your consciousness begins to drift toward dreams, imagine yourself walking along a path in ancient Greece. Olive trees cast dappled shade on dusty ground. In the distance, a marble temple gleams on a hillside. The air carries scents of pine, thyme, and sea salt. You are traveling through a landscape where every feature might hold a story. That spring, where a nymph was transformed to escape an unwanted pursuit. That mountain where gods gathered in council. That cave entrance that might lead to the underworld. The myths layer the physical world with meaning, connecting the visible present to an unseen past where the boundaries between human and divine were more permeable. Now the stars are appearing overhead, arranged in patterns the Greeks named for heroes and creatures of legend. There is Orion the hunter, pursued across the sky by Scorpio. There are the Pleiades, 7 sisters transformed into stars to escape Orion's unwanted attention. There is the Great Bear, once the nymph Callisto, transformed by a jealous Hera and placed in the heavens by Zeus. The night sky becomes a vast canvas of stories, a cosmic memory preserving ancient tales through the unchanging movements of celestial bodies. As you gaze upward, you participate in a continuous human tradition of finding meaning in patterns of light against darkness. Sleep approaches like Hypnos, gentle brother of Thanatos, bringing not death, but temporary release from consciousness. In Greek thought, these two states were connected: sleep as a small death, death as an endless sleep. Yet dreams provided potential bridges between ordinary awareness and divine communication. As you settle into deeper rest, perhaps Morpheus will shape your dreams into stories as vivid and meaningful as the myths we've explored. Or perhaps your unconscious mind will weave its own tapestry from threads of ancient narratives combined with personal memories and desires, creating the individual mythology that helps make sense of your unique journey through time. The myths of ancient Greece were never static, but constantly retold and reimagined to address changing cultural needs and individual insights. They invite us not to passive reception, but to active engagement, finding ourselves in these old stories while simultaneously making them new through our particular perspective. Like Perseus using his polished shield to approach Medusa indirectly, we can use myths as reflective surfaces that allow us to examine difficult truths that might be too overwhelming to face directly. The distance of time and the artistic framing of narrative create a space where we can safely explore the mysteries, terrors, and wonders of human existence. Now rest in the knowledge that these stories have endured for thousands of years and will continue beyond our time. They have been carried forward by countless voices, poets and playwrights, artists and philosophers, parents telling bedtime tales to children, teachers introducing young minds to cultural heritage. You participate in this ongoing transmission simply by receiving these narratives into your consciousness, allowing them to work upon your imagination in ways that may surface later in unexpected insights or creative expressions. The myths live as long as they continue to be remembered and found meaningful. Their immortality depending not on unchanging preservation, but on constant renewal through engagement with new minds and hearts. As your breathing deepens and thoughts begin to quiet, let the figures of Greek mythology, gods and goddesses, heroes and monsters, mortals blessed and cursed by divine attention, recede like waves pulling back from shore, leaving behind gleaming fragments of story on the sand of consciousness. There is Zeus with his thunderbolt and eagle, embodying authority and the unpredictable power of the sky. There is Athena with her owl and olive tree, representing wisdom that balances intellect with practical gifts that nurture life. There is Odysseus on his long journey home, enduring hardship and temptation while holding fast to his essential identity and purpose. There is Persephone moving between worlds, carrying within herself both darkness and light, death and rebirth. These figures and their stories drift with you toward the borders of sleep, companions on the journey into night. They have accompanied countless others before you, offering their wisdom, their warnings, their wonder to generations across millennia. The chain of transmission stretches back to ancient firelit gatherings where tales were shared orally, through classical theaters where myths took dramatic form, through medieval manuscripts that preserved ancient texts, through Renaissance artworks that gave visual expression to mythic narratives, through modern retellings across diverse media, and now to this moment where these ageless stories accompany your descent into dreams. The night deepens around you, and with it comes the gentle recognition that consciousness must periodically surrender to unconsciousness, just as the Greeks understood that human experience moves through cycles of activity and rest, growth and decay, joy and sorrow. The myths embrace these rhythms rather than denying them, finding meaning not in escape from life's patterns, but in their mindful integration. There is wisdom in acknowledging limits, in accepting that not even the gods are omnipotent, that fate sets boundaries which divinity itself must respect. Within these constraints, however, lies the possibility for creativity, for choice, for excellence that honors what is best in both human and divine nature. And so, we come to rest, like ships reaching harbor after long journeys across wine-dark seas. The stories of Greek mythology continue their endless unfolding in cultural memory and individual imagination. Zeus still hurls his thunderbolts when storm clouds gather. Poseidon's trident still stirs the depths when waves crash against rocky shores. Apollo's golden chariot still carries light across the sky with each dawn. Demeter's grief and joy still cycle through the seasons. The myths live because they speak to experiences that remain fundamental to human existence: love and loss, ambition and limitation, wonder and terror, the search for meaning within mortality. As sleep approaches, these ancient figures stand watch like constellations overhead, distant yet familiar, their light reaching us from across vast expanses of time. They offer no single truth, but many truths, no definitive answers, but rich questions that each heart must engage in its own way. Their endurance testifies to their depth and flexibility, their capacity to illuminate aspects of experience that resist simpler explanations. In their complexity and occasional contradictions, they mirror life itself, neither entirely coherent nor completely chaotic, but woven of patterns that emerge, dissolve, and reform in endless variation. Now rest in the embrace of Nyx, goddess of night, whose dark wings spread across the world, bringing necessary pause to daily striving. Tomorrow, Eos, rosy-fingered dawn, will herald new beginnings, new possibilities, new stories waiting to unfold. But for now, let consciousness loosen its hold, surrendering to mystery as the ancient Greeks surrendered to the greater forces they personified as gods. Not in defeat, but in recognition of a cosmic order that includes both light and shadow, both knowing and not knowing, both the measured rhythm of rational thought and the bottomless depths of dreams where another kind of wisdom may be found. Sleep well, And perhaps the myths will visit you in new forms beyond the reach of waking mind, whispering secrets as old as humanity and as fresh as your next breath.